two, one. Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shiad. Joining me, my good friends back from Israel, fresh still on jet lag, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky and Rabbi Barry Chesler. We're recording this. This is about the latest we've ever recorded a Parsha Talk. In the week, it's Friday afternoon, Erev Shabbat, but we know that our devoted 3 listeners and viewers want to see more Parsha Talk. It's like more cowbell. How much more Parsha Talk can you have in your lives? Actually, no, we have a great following. We have a great following. In fact, many people in my show, at least, have been saying, we miss you, and so we are delighted to be with you on Parsha Aharei. I would be remiss if I didn't say it's an amazing parsha. It is an amazing parsha.
Wait, what is more cowbell? What is that?
More cowbell from the Saturday Night Live skit. With Christopher Walken, right? More cow. I'm just. I got a.
Now there's a voice of normal.
I got a fever for more cowbell. Okay, so this is Aharei Mot. We are familiar with this parsha because we read it every Yom Kippur for reasons which will become obvious in a moment. I want to start off by just reflecting on what I think is just the personal lives of the leaders of our nation. Moshe, Aaron, Miriam is in the background. She's not here. She doesn't play a supportive role in the political and ecclesiastical life of the people here. But Moses as the leader and Aaron as the high priest. The text begins, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe aharei mot shnei bnei Aaron, after the death of his 2 sons. So we don't know when this set of rules is being issued, but it is after the death of the 2 sons. It's after this crisis, after a cataclysmic tragedy, where on the occasion of the consecration of the tabernacle, when the tabernacle was being sanctified and the altar was being, consecrated, the 2 sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, came in with an esh zarah. However we want to interpret it, they stepped over the boundary and were incinerated because of that. And even though it's the violation was a technical violation of the rules of the sanctuary, it still had to affect Aaron personally. And we can't get over reading these rules without thinking that there are human beings behind this story. And so I think reading very closely on these 2 verses that begin this parsha, we have God speaking to Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron. And then it says again, God speaks to Moses again and then says, tell Aaron your brother. So I want to propose that there's the doubling here, which of course, scholars can relate to as, there may be 2 versions and two recensions and all that, but there's an interpretation that is begging at us, which is that coming to terms with the calamity is actually very difficult. And that what is necessary here is the balancing of the public role and the private grief. And that in issuing these rules, what we are learning here is that despite the private lives of the 2 leaders, especially Aaron, who is the bereaved father, the people need to go on. And that's your lot in life as the leader. And I want you to reflect on that. And Barry, I want you to, maybe make the American parallel and the constitutional parallel for us.
So when we were discussing before the show, the example that came up from American history was the assassination of John Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. And at the airport, President Johnson took the oath of office in the presence of the First Lady, the
former
past First Lady, Jackie Kennedy, later to become Jackie Kennedy Onassis, wearing a dress that was blood and brain spattered from her husband. And we were talking that when she goes back to Washington, in a sense, she has no house to go back to because she's no longer the wife of the president. And it was a striking moment. I still have a vivid memory, I don't know of the actual event, but certainly of the picture of that somber look on President Johnson, who now has the weight of the world on his shoulders.
There was the photograph was taken in Air Force One. That was the
right before they got on.
And they grabbed some local judge to do this.
I think they're in the air.
They were in the air when
they were standing. He was standing though when he took the oath. So okay, all right.
But what you're saying is very important, because what you're saying is that the Constitution overrides the personal grief. And of course, on subsequent days in November of '63, there were national days of mourning and all of the rituals, the national rituals that were necessary to go through this great calamity. But constitutionally, the government had to function, and the president had the legal authority at the time.
Right. And the other thing, the other incident that comes to mind in a different vein was July 4th, 1976, which was the 250th anniversary of the United States. 200th, excuse me. But also the day of Entebbe, when Yoni Netanyahu was killed in battle, and his brother Benjamin had to go tell their father.
Yeah.
And there's a great moment, and there was a member of my congregation at the time who happened to be at the Kotel that day, and has a beautiful picture, the moment that the news was announced in Israel of the Kotel. A great day for Israel, but a tragedy for the Netanyahu family.
Right.
And again, the difference between the personal and the national. But I was struck by something you said earlier, Elliot, that I think bears on what we have to say here. And you talked about a pause between the two verses. And it seems that perhaps the pause is because God says something to Moses, and Moses now has to think about how he's going to tell it to Aaron. And he can't just relay it like we normally have, but rather there's something going on here that Moses has to address himself.
And I would emphasize that in the second verse, it's Daber ala Aaron achicha. Speak to Aaron, your brother. And I was preparing some material on this, and there are something like 300 occurrences of Aaron in the Torah. 11 are Aaron achicha. And it would be interesting to kind of do that, that exercise, which is the concordance exercise. Collect all these places where it's Aharon Achicha, and I mean, my sermon on this would be, at what point does he need to refer to Aaron as his brother? What's the necessity of the intimacy of the brotherly sibling relationship? And a couple of those leap up at us, and they're easy to access, which is that. When Moses comes back from his exile, Aaron Achicha is going to see you. And when Moses is dispatched to Pharaoh, it's Aaron Achicha is going to speak for you. And that occurs a couple of times. And then the last time when it's Aaron Achicha, I mean, I don't have to make you, suspense here, but it's, well, where do you think it is?
It's got to be when he leads him up the mountain.
You take your brother, take Aaron Achicha, and basically take off his vestments, and it's like, duh, why wouldn't the text have said Aaron Achicha? He's not there only as the head priest. He's there as your brother. And so here I want to say, almost homiletically, but almost as a pshat, look, when you talk to him, remember that he had this tragedy. Remember that he lost 2 of his sons right now. And remember that you're his brother, and that you're not just Moses, like the big shot, Moses the leader. Remember that you're also the brother. And so I find it fascinating. We're rabbis, we're leaders, and we're constantly engaged in this dynamic of the public and the private. And it's certainly nowhere near in terms of magnitude as in terms of political leadership. But these elements are always present for us, and the boundaries are necessary. And when you realize that there is a necessity to function for the community, then certain things that are personal are subordinated to that. I don't know if you have a reaction to that. Maybe.
I would say, I mean, I have a reaction to something else. So if
Yeah.
Barry wants to speak about that.
So another example came to mind. Apparently, the Munich massacre happened around the time that Golda Meir was sitting Shiva for a sibling. And there was some controversy in Israel about how she was behaving because the nation needed her and she had this private moment of grief.
Yeah.
And so, I think part of the message for us is we have to remember that our leaders are human beings.
Yes.
And we tend to lose sight of that, both for good and for bad. And the Torah reading this week reminds us that we cannot lose sight.
It's interesting because the president of Israel, Bougie Herzog, during he was in the week of, I think they postponed it. He was in mourning for his mother. His mother died just after, I think, he was inaugurated, or maybe, I don't know, something like that. But all of that is very, very important.
We have, it's interesting you say that about the public-private dynamic. We also have the normative for everybody dynamic that a holiday cancels Shiva because public joy is seen to supersede private suffering, and one is supposed to. I mean, of course, in reality, in personal life, people don't just set aside their grief and have sukkahs, but it is true that normatively speaking, public joy supersedes private suffering. But I wanted to say something else about what is it that Moses has to convey to Aaron. We were talking before we started recording about what I think is a kind of a disjunction between the one-time tragedy disaster of Nadav and Avihu, which happens once, and the number or Leviticus 16 here this is what's supposed to happen all the time, every year, cyclically. This is a regular event. Why introduce one of the regular rituals with a reference to an extraordinary event? And I was thinking about it, and it occurs to me that perhaps what's being said is not only that Moshe says to Aaron, we have to do this, we have to you have to come to your role. He has to say it in an achicha, your brother kind of way. But also, Moses is saying to Aaron that repair is actually possible. Okay, this was terrible. This was absolutely awful. It couldn't have been worse, according to this way of reading it. But it's not over. And in fact, we can put this back together. And in fact, in the life of the people, on an every year basis, as the text says, that the Mishkan is shochenitam betoch tumotam. The Mishkan lives among the people in all their impurity. And there's perhaps a religious impulse to say, "Oh man, we're lost. We're a mess. There's no way back from this bad road." And instead, actually, kapara is possible. Kapara is a reality. Atonement's a reality. Tshuva is a reality. And especially if you want to read, as I do when we talked about this in Parsha Shmini, and we've talked about in previous years, I want to read the deaths of Nadav and Avihu as really a kind of veiled response to Aaron and the golden calf. If Moshe says to Aaron, or Aaron says to himself perhaps, "Oh my goodness, my sons have just been killed in a spectacular way. This golden calf thing, I'm never going to get away from it. It's never going to leave me behind. I can never move forward." Moshe says, "Okay, by the way, here's what we're going to do. Once a year, there is a ritual that is going to put all the broken stuff back together again, and that is just of huge importance for Am Yisrael. Anybody who's been through Yom Kippur, as we all have many times, knows that you just, if you do it with intensity, you come away feeling like you get a second chance to fix all those mistakes that you've inflicted." And so I think there's a powerful, again, like you said, Eli, I love it, on a homiletical, but it's almost pshat. Like if you get a homiletical reading that's so good, you feel like it's almost pshat. It's almost a simple meaning. I feel like Moses saying to Aaron, this too can be put back together again, I think is powerful.
So what you suggest, Jeremy, is that there's a difference between removal of impurity, which is one theme that runs through chapter 16, and actual cleansing. which would be the positive step that we do, and that Yom Kippur functions in both ways. And what is intriguing to me is that the first Yom Kippur was after a national tragedy of the golden calf, which you mentioned, and the second Yom Kippur is coming after the deaths of Nadav and Avihu, and both times there's a poignance and a great dramatic moment because the people have to, in a sense, purge themselves, not just the Mishkan, in order to reconstitute their lives. And that's a challenge to us all the time, I think, and especially on Yom Kippur as we go through our lives.
I think it's a remarkable thing. You know, we talk about this around Yom Kippur, and here, of course, we're reading it in the cycle of the Torah readings. That the idea that you would have this ability to be cleansed or be renewed, to you know, the term is purgation. That in the sanctuary, all of the impurity is purged out of it through the rituals that are done, and all of the sins are ridded. It's what Baruch Levine calls a riddance ritual, right? These are rites of riddance. You know, the transference or the placing of the sins and onto the scapegoat, and having that scapegoat go into the wilderness. These are very, very unusual rites, and of course the Mishnah develops them in ways that are really, you know, frame by frame almost. And it's quite unique. The idea is that as the sanctuary, you know, functions during the year, these impurities accumulate, the sins accumulate, and at some point you have to clean it out. I mean, we just finished Pesach here, you know, and I feel this way at Pesach when I really do a deep cleaning. Sometimes it doesn't happen till after Pesach, but you know, there's the sense that you are purging stuff. You know, if you really get rid of every last bit of chametz, it's a purge. And you know, I don't have to go to people who have experienced burglaries or traumas of any kind of sort, but the necessity to purge that residual feeling, I think it's very powerful. And it must have been very powerful in a world in which the very existence of the people depended on the sense of God's proximity. And if God is proximate because the people are pure and do righteous things, and is pushed away when the people do bad things and impurities accumulate, then it becomes of ultimate significance. And so these purgation rituals, I think, strike very deeply. There's a deep chord of our humanity in the experiences that we have in life. Whenever we feel a sense of defilement, you know, you need to take a bath, is what we're saying. Some of us more often. I don't know. But and of course, you know, we have a whole problem relating to when this commandment or these rules are issued, and where and how Yom Kippur takes place. And I suppose, you know, we could go into that, but we're going to leave it and move to another topic, which is the calendar which we are in. We are in a very special period of time. And I kind of wish that this would take on more significance and get more currency within Klal Yisrael. The notion of Aseret Yemei Todah, 10 days of gratitude. This initiative is being spearheaded by Bet Prat. You know this yeshiva? This is a secular yeshiva in Israel. Micha Goodman, philosopher, he's a writer, he's a public intellectual. And so you're hearing more about the days between Yom Hashoa. So this past Wednesday night, we gathered and commemorated Yom HaShoah. The national commemoration of Yom HaShoah in Israel took place also Wednesday night. And we're moving to Jeremy, we're just in Israel. So you know what? Just remind us, take us to the last couple of days and tell us about the emotional rhythm that's going on here. And if you can, you know, relate to us.
Yom HaShoah was so intense in Israel. You know, I watched on TV the Yad Vashem presentation, listened a lot on the radio, and the solemnity of the day. The siren came, as all of our listeners probably know, that just like on Yom HaZikaron, Israel Memorial Day, on Yom HaShoah at 10 a.m. in the morning, there's a siren and everyone stands still. And I was in the airport when that happened. It was it was really powerful. There was lots of material on the radio, and people told stories. Interestingly enough, in the course of just a couple of days, I heard on the radio 2 reports about the Shoah in North Africa, because as you know, the Nazis occupied northern France, and Vichy France, ostensibly an independent government, but really a Nazi puppet, controlled the French colonies in North Africa. So there was lots and lots of Jews under the Nazis. They didn't send them to extermination camps, but life was very, very hard. These are something I really didn't even know about. And one of the people who was interviewed on the radio, the announcer asked, "Why do you think this is coming now?" And the person said, "Well, obviously we've spent a great deal of time, focused on what happened to European Jews, but we're at a point where, like, the North Africans, they sort of felt embarrassed to be able to talk about their own suffering, because it paled in comparison. Of course, there wasn't that massive amount of death, but it was really hard on the people in Tunisia. And there was two broadcasts I heard about the Tunisian suffering under the Nazis, and Kobe O's, a pop star who was from a Tunisian family, did a song about the suffering of his family under the Vichy government, and that was pretty intense. But the most intense thing was the TV. There were 6 survivors lighting 6, candles.
Torches.
Not candles; they were like,
torches. Yeah, big torches.
Big public torches, and 6 of them were there. They're of course among the youngest survivors, and they're all into their 80s and 90s now. And one of the 6 people, the son had to light because the father had died, and just in the intervening, just a couple of weeks before. They talked on the radio. I forget the number that they said, but they talked on the radio about just how many Shoah survivors are dying each year. And we can of course imagine we're going to get to the spot when the last Shoah survivor, like the last Civil War veteran or the last World War I veteran or something like that, passes away. I had this feeling on the day before, the afternoon going into Yom HaShoah, as I was listening to one of those broadcasts. I was driving up to Jerusalem, and I just had this, you talk about the sense of gratitude. I've been in Israel a million times. It's hugely important to me. It's hugely meaningful to me. I love being in Israel. In a sense, the greatest regret in my life is having not made my life there. And I just felt this enormous sense of blessing that could be true for me, that is true of my life, that being in Israel, being among Am Yisrael, and being at whatever distance, a supportive partner in the building of the Jewish people, the Jewish state. I could have been born in 1930 in Poland, and I could have been a child murdered by the Nazis. So many people were murdered by the Nazis. I just felt this enormous, unearned blessing that I have the modern state of Israel as part of my life.
So this is it's a real topic of conversation for people who really take this quite seriously. I think those of us who live very close to the rhythms of Jewish life are deeply involved in this, and of course we have skin in the game. We're all we have personal relationships, children in my case, and family, distant family, second maybe third cousins, and of course some very, very dear friends, and the sense of what our connection is and how we are related to each other. And I think it's extraordinarily complicated. I think sometimes I joke when I'm talking to Israelis that American Jews and Israelis need to have some family therapy, and to work through some of this relationship, because there are a lot of stated and unstated things going on. But let's go back to the rhythm of these days, and we're all connected to the narrative. The narrative of the Shoah defines us, and so here we are moving into a week where Tuesday night, Wednesday is Yom HaZikaron, and then Thursday already is Yom HaAtzmaut.
So I just want to interject here.
Yeah.
So this actually is a fascinating discussion because we have the intersection of history and religion. As we know, we're in the month of Nisan, which traditionally was a joyous month. It's not a month that we say traditionally the Tachnun, the penitential prayers. And yet, on the other hand, people know from their observance of Sefirah, we don't have weddings during Nisan as well because of historical circumstance, or what was believed to be historical circumstance. Yom HaShoah this year and Yom HaAtzmaut are actually a day earlier than they're supposed to be on the Jewish calendar, because the date that was chosen for Yom HaShoah is the 27th of Nisan. Yom HaAtzmaut is the 5th of Iyar. They're 8 days apart on the calendar, but as the law developed in Israel, they cannot be observed on Friday. And so when the date of either one falls on Friday, and sometimes Yom HaAtzmaut could be on Saturday, they move it back to Thursday so that the observance of either day does not conflict with Shabbat observance. And I think it makes an important point for us that, there are boundaries even to history, that exactitude is not necessarily a province of history. Sometimes we just come close. The other thing I wanted to add is that there was a great discussion in Israel in the late 40s, early 50s about how to observe Yom HaShoah. The traditionalist camp wanted to keep it on Tisha B'Av. There was actually an alternative date, the 10th of Tevet, which is perhaps the least observed fast day on the traditional Jewish calendar. And they chose the 27th of Nisan, which was second to the date that many, certainly secular Jews wanted, which was the 16th of Nisan, when the Warsaw Ghetto uprising erupted, but that was also during Pesach, and that was not seemed to be appropriate. But what we have today is Yom HaShoah, and then 8 days later Yom HaAtzmaut, to make the point, to me at least, that they belong to different times. They're a week apart. We have a full week between Yom HaShoah and Yom HaAtzmaut because we're not supposed to make a theological connection between the two events, as tempting as it may be to do so.
And it is a kind of shiva. I mean, we do shoehorn this, and this is, I guess, the accidents of the calendar that fuse these moments together. And then, of course, as we observe this annually. You hear Israelis say it couldn't be any other way. We could not have Yom HaAtzmaut without Yom HaZikaron, and we could not have Yom HaZikaron without Yom HaAtzmaut. I've been in Israel. We were there a couple of years ago in 2018 for the Yom HaAtzmaut, and the transition ceremony between Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut is actually very striking. It is a liminal moment. It is one of these powerful moments where one thing comes to a conclusion, a day where everything that has been solemn, somber, filled with memorial, filled with reminiscence, filled with the understanding of the necessity of sacrifice in order for the country to exist. And then, of course, that needs to go somewhere. You can't sustain that level of intensity and grief without some kind of celebration afterwards. And I think these days do draw from the Jewish experience. They draw from a Jewish sensibility, Judaic Judaism, which is you need to mi'agon liyom tov, mi'eva liyom tov, mi'agon l'simcha. We understand that these are zones, and that you need to make this transition into these zones. You can't live completely in the zone of grief, and you can't live completely in the zone of joy. Of course, we would like to live our lives without zones of grief, but we know that these are necessities in our lives. And this week, more than any other week that I know, both on in the context of Jewish life, and I don't think there's any parallel to this anywhere. I mean, I can't think of an American parallel to it. I certainly can't think of a Canadian parallel. The Remembrance Day in Canada is in November. The Independence, the Confederation, the Canada Day is July 1st. America, July 4th is Independence Day. Memorial Day is coming up in May. They're not connected, and I think in countries where it's not connected, there's a price that's being paid. The narrative is it's the loss of narrative, the loss of connection. We could use a sense of dedication and narrative and commemoration, I think, everywhere. I mean, Israel can teach us certain things.
Yes, because we, I don't venture a guess as to what American Memorial Day was like, after the Civil War or after, World War I or II. But now it's not. It's not.
It's nothing. It's not connected to anything, unless you're.
It's not meaningful. It doesn't have the mashma'ut. In American life, have been at the Vietnam Wall and seen the enormous power that has. But that's a place and it's a shrine. It's not a day.
Yeah,
it's not a day.
So,
pilgrimage ritual.
What I would suggest is that a fundamental difference between Israel and the United States and Canada as well is that Israel is a very small country in which a huge number of people have been in the military. Everyone in Israel knows someone who is remembered on Yom HaZikaron. That's not true in the United States. And especially, I think about myself and about my father's generation. My father's generation, everyone who was of age went to war in World War II. And in my generation, no one I know personally went. I mean, some of my sister's friends ended up going to Vietnam, but in my specific generation, there was very little, if none, military experience. And even in our profession, the rabbinate, there are only a handful, I think maybe a few more to be accurate, who become military chaplains.
So go ahead. Yeah.
So that there has to be a different resonance between Israel and our Western countries because of the numbers.
I think on the question of numbers, I was reading an article by a scholar in Ben Gurion University. His name is Jackie Feldman. He writes about these kinds of issues, and one of the lines in that article was that Israel has the highest proportion of monuments. The ratio of monuments to deceased soldiers is the highest of any country he knows of. The average is 1 to 10,000. There's one monument for every 10,000 losses. In Israel, it's 1 for every 16. In other words, the notion of the personal, distance between loss, bereavement, connecting the parasha, I guess, to commemoration is very, very close in Israel. And I would say, and here we're about to run out of time, but one of the ways that this is reflected in geography, this week is reflected by the proximity of Yad Vashem to Mount Herzl. The Yad Vashem, of course, is the national memorial to the Holocaust with the museum and its various monuments. And of course, Mount Herzl, the burial place of Herzl, Theodor Herzl, founder of the Zionist movement, and all the leaders of the nation, and most importantly, all the soldiers, some 24,000. They're not all buried at Mount Herzl, but in that order of magnitude in terms of the numbers of people who have laid down their lives for Israel. It's 24,068 as of this year. There's a pathway between Yad Vashem and Har Herzl. It's called the connecting path, right? And it's a narrative path, and of course it's intentional. Of course it says, we are connected in Jewish history. We're connected as a people. We who are outside of Israel and are deeply connected and deeply involved, we share in the rhythm, and we don't share in the geography, obviously, because we don't live there. But we certainly resonate to it, and we don't have the actual pilgrimage to these places, but we make a pilgrimage of spirit and a pilgrimage of heart. We bring our hearts to these things, and these are the greatest sources of pain for the Jewish world. But I think, Jeremy, as you said, it's the greatest source of pride that we have. Israel, as a modern Jew today, I can't think of anything that comes close to that as a source of pride and the necessity of Israel in our life in an existential way that we sometimes we take it for granted, but we couldn't live without it as Jews. I think it so much defines us. I don't know.
I feel that for all of Israel's problems and there are, and I especially feel that there's certain kinds of madness. As a liberal Zionist, I feel that there are certain kinds of madness that religious Zionism sometimes manifests. I mean, when I was there and listening to the radio, I kid you not, they arrested some people. They went to their houses and found that they had taken the goat and tied it up. The kar'ei hamitah, they had tied the goat up to the bedposts in the yard, and were intending to have Korban Pesach on the Temple Mount. And you can only imagine the
explosiveness.
The explosiveness that would have entailed. Oh, dear God, thank heavens for the shin bet, and they're paying. They figured out.
But that's not normative. Those are the. Look,
they're fringe, but they're not. They're fringe, but there's not one or two of them. Anyway, but my point is that what I do want to say, especially in the wake of Yom HaShoah and looking towards Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, is that this is a country with a strong sense of destiny, dealing with the past and committing to the future. And I think the United States, for all the wonderful things, and I really don't know if this applies to Canada, but I'm going to guess it does, is that even in the directed sense of the United States aspires to this or that, and liberty and justice for all, and those things are important. We don't have that sense of national project that people devote their lives to in the way that people serve in Israel. And I still think there's lots of folks who do have that. And I do think the national service, military service is declining a little bit, but still it's still a huge part of life. And I feel that the Shoah into the Tikuma, from the devastation till the building and upholding, remains a narrative in that country in an extraordinarily positive way. I don't know that the Jewish people, if they didn't have this opportunity to building, I don't think they would have survived. I don't think we would have survived the Shoah. I think Shoah would have won if we did not have this opportunity to
exactly.
So we might give then the last word to the Baal Shem Tov, one of the great figures of Jewish history, whose words are near the end of Yad Vashem, which is that forgetfulness leads to exile, memory leads to redemption. And the season that we're in is one where we blend our personal memory with the national memory. And that, I think, is where redemption takes place.
Beautiful, beautiful. Ki fada Adonai et Yaakov uga'alo miyad chazak mimenu. For God has redeemed Jacob and redeemed from one too strong for him. Okay, so with that, we are praying for everyone and our brothers and sisters throughout the world. We are praying for Medinat Yisrael. May God bless Medinat Yisrael. And we all hope to enjoy a beautiful Shabbat. I know that this is coming late into your inboxes and online, but we look forward to seeing you again on a future edition of Parsha Talk. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.